Certificates prepared for Elvis Presley, and that Presley's doctor tried to hide the amount of drugs the singer had taken the day he died. We will have more on the story behind Presley's death on the ABC News Magazine 2020, which follows next.
Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, dead almost 2.5 years, but the controversy over what killed him, the overuse of dangerous drugs, rages on. Tonight, a follow-up on that controversy and Geraldo Rivera's investigation of Presley's personal physician, the Elvis Coverup, Part 2.
Tonight, in September 2020, devoted a full hour to an investigative report by Geraldo Rivera on the death of Elvis Presley, a report we called the Elvis Cover-Up. Well, there's now more to the story, and Geraldo is back to tell us about it. The Elvis Cover-Up Part 2. Geraldo.
Elvis Presley shared a problem in common with millions of other well-to-do Americans. He was a medical drug addict, maintained in his drug habit by unscrupulous doctors. Doctors who apparently cared more for his business and his friendship than they did for his health or his well-being. Principal among the licensed professionals who prescribed for Elvis what he wanted, whenever he wanted it, was Dr. George Nicopolis of Memphis, Tennessee. The criminal investigation currently pending against him bears the code name Operation Dr. Nick.
But you deny that you prescribed large amounts of narcotics to Elvis Presley in the last year of his life. To wit, over 5,000 Schedule II narcotics and amphetamines.
I don't have any comment.
In Part 1 of the Elvis Cover-Up, we reported how Dr. Nick prescribed 5,600 narcotic pills to his famous patient in just the last 7 months of Elvis Presley's life. Additional evidence uncovered by investigators for the state of Tennessee indicates that the doctor's pattern of overprescription had been going on for years. According to the Board of Medical Examiners, between January 10, 1976 and August 16, 1977, the day Elvis died, Dr. Nicopolis prescribed 12,000 narcotic pills to the man who was the king of rock and roll. That's 12,000.
Because it's difficult for us to comprehend the enormous amount of narcotic pills prescribed by Dr. George Nicopolis to Elvis Presley, we've put together this display. This is what 12,000 pills look like. During the last 20 months of Elvis's life, he received prescriptions for an average of 20 uppers, downers, and other narcotic pills for each day of his life. He also received prescriptions for at least 1 narcotic injection a day during the last 20 months of his life. And remember, what you see here represents just the amount prescribed by a single doctor, Dr. George Nicopolis, and in a single town, Memphis, Tennessee. There were other doctors in Las Vegas, in Los Angeles, and in other cities along the way.
I've never seen a human being in my life ever abuse drugs like Elvis did, ever.
By now, the stories of Elvis's drug abuse have been told by enough people and in sufficient detail that little doubt remains, even among the most ardent Presley fans, that the man had an extremely serious problem. Elvis had taken at least a dozen narcotic pills in the 4 hours preceding his death. There was absolutely no medical justification. His only legitimate medical problem that night was a toothache. His body was discovered at 2:30 in the afternoon by his fiancée, Ginger Alden. She called the aides, who began frantically trying to resuscitate him. He had already been dead at least 5 hours. The cover-up began even when Elvis's body was still on the floor of his bathroom. Minutes after receiving a call for help, an emergency ambulance team from the Memphis Fire Department arrived at Graceland. Ulysses Jones was one of the 2 paramedics dispatched.
When we arrived at Graceland into the restroom, we were greeted by some people that was working on it when we got there.
They were actually working on the body?
Yes, sir. Okay, we asked what had happened. Like I said, one of the fellows, a tall, dark-haired fellow, the mustache turned to us and said that he had apparently OD'd.
That Elvis had apparently OD'd?
Oh, yes, sir.
And what did you take that to mean?
That he had overdosed.
Then what happened?
Okay, we asked for the medication, if he was on any type of medication. They told us yes, and he told us that his doctor was coming and his doctor would help him. Just as we got ready to pull off, that's when Dr. Nicopolis arrived.
Did you ever get the medication you had asked for?
No, sir.
So the aide, who clearly believed Elvis had overdosed, told Mr. Jones that Dr. Nick would collect the medication Elvis had been taking. It's clear from a review of the Memphis Police Department records that Dr. Nick never turned over anything, and in fact told the police virtually nothing about Elvis's drug problem. Quite the contrary. The records indicate Dr. Nick made false statements to the police. He told them that Elvis had taken some medication, 2 Valiums and 1 other pill, in the hours preceding the death. From the testimony of the eyewitnesses, from the analysis of Elvis's blood and body, and from the list of drugs dispensed the day before he died, we know now Dr. Nick's statements were false. After the body was taken to Baptist Hospital, Dan Warlick, an investigator for the medical examiner's office, went to the Presley estate. His first stop was the bedroom suite, which Warlick discovered to his displeasure had been totally cleaned up, with the exception of an empty syringe cartridge. In the bathroom, Warlick found another syringe and a black doctor's bag, but the bag was empty. We're uncertain of what happened to whatever medication was kept in the bathroom, but we do have certain circumstantial facts. We know now, for instance, that Dr. Nicopolis returned to the bathroom after the body had been removed. And this advertisement appeared in a Memphis newspaper shortly after our first program on this subject aired last September. Someone was offering one of Elvis's last prescription bottles for sale. A check of the record shows the prescription was issued the day before Elvis died. We've spoken with the people who placed that ad. Their names are Randy and Amy McCord of Memphis. They refused to appear on camera and also refused to permit us to photograph the empty bottle. Amy McCord has told the district attorney that the bottle had been given to her by Elaine Nicopolis, Dr. Nick's daughter. The McCords told us that Miss Nicopolis removed the bottle from her father's medical bag shortly after Elvis died. The McCords have offered it for sale for $1,000. Dr. Nicopolis was at least less than candid with Dan Warlick, the investigator from the medical examiner's office. In sworn testimony given in a lawsuit brought by 2020 producer Charles Thompson, Warlick testified Nicopolis never informed him of the drugs he was prescribing to Elvis Presley. Likewise, the medical examiner, Dr. Jerry T. Francisco, testified that Dr. Nick never advised him of Presley's use and misuse of drugs. Nor did Nicopolis ever inform any of the doctors who were performing the autopsy. The net effect of his omissions, leading everyone away from the fact of Elvis Presley's drug addiction and from his own conduct in prescribing those drugs. And there's more about a death certificate. ABC News has learned that there was a second death certificate involved in the Elvis Presley case. Just 2 weeks after Elvis died, but almost 2 months before the autopsy on his body was completed, his doctor, Dr. Nicopolis, attempted to bypass the work being done by the autopsy team at the Baptist Memorial Hospital. Dr. Nick filed his own version of the death certificate, and it was apparently an attempt by Dr. Nick to ensure that whatever the final autopsy results revealed, the cause of death would not be listed as drug abuse. This is a copy of the death certificate submitted by Dr. Nicopolis, while this is the actual death certificate submitted 2 months later by Dr. Jerry T. Francisco. On Tuesday, the 18th of October, 1977, at about 2 in the afternoon, there was a meeting at Graceland. The doctors who had performed the autopsy presented the 40-page report to Elvis's father, Vernon Presley. Attending the meeting were Dr. Eric Muirhead, Chief of Pathology at Baptist Hospital, Dr. Harold Sexton, his assistant, Maurice Elliott, Vice President of the hospital, Dr. Jerry T. Francisco, the Shelby County Medical Examiner, Mrs. Robert Koch, Elvis's personal nurse and longtime friend, and Sandy Miller, Vernon's fiancée. Dr. Muirhead presided. ABC News has learned that Dr. Muirhead informed Mr. Presley that his son died from the interaction of the drugs in his system. According to sworn testimony given by Maurice Elliott, Dr. Francisco at the time stated he was in general agreement with that conclusion. But 3 days later, Dr. Francisco would tell the world a much different story.
The cause of death has been ascribed to hypertensive heart disease and coronary artery heart disease as a contributory factor.
Dr. Francisco has for the last 6 months refused our repeated requests for an interview. He did, however, grant an interview to Joan Draghi. Joan is a reporter for WHBQ, that's the ABC affiliate station in Memphis.
Your opinion is that Elvis did not die of drugs.
That's correct.
Given another doctor, however, he might come up with a different conclusion.
Absolutely.
Given those different opinions and disagreements, some disagreements between other doctors and yourself, and given the new information on Dr. Nicopolis, the charges, do you have any objection to reopening the Elvis case?
Well, there's nothing to reopen. The charges against Dr. Nicopolis have absolutely nothing to do with the cause of Elvis's death. There's no relationship.
So despite the original autopsy findings, and despite the new information derived from this and other investigations, medical examiner Francisco continues to insist, first, that drugs played no role in Elvis Presley's death, and that secondly, there is no new information that would cause Dr. Francisco to reconsider his official opinion. Because of the technical nature of this case, 2020 has retained the services of Dr. John Fiegel. Currently the deputy medical examiner in Atlanta, Dr. Fiegel has 20 years' experience in investigating suspicious deaths.
How do you characterize Dr. Francisco's decision that the fact that Elvis Presley received 196 prescriptions for over 12,000 pills was not relevant to the cause of death?
Well, I would have to disagree. I think that it is relevant and probably very significant.
Would you, if you were the medical examiner on this case, reopen this case?
I would open it this very afternoon if that were something I just learned.
Dr. Francisco's continued insistence that Elvis Presley died of a heart attack and his continued refusal to reopen the investigation are perhaps based on one of two considerations. Either the medical examiner made an innocent mistake but now refuses to correct it, or he may intentionally have tried to cover up the real reason Elvis Presley died. Some of the evidence we have accumulated supports at least the possibility of a cover-up. Item: the press release issued by Dr. Francisco shortly after the meeting with Vernon Presley at Graceland. In it, Dr. Francisco tells of consulting two outside toxicologists. He goes on to say that one of the two reported there was no evidence that the drugs in Elvis's body caused or made any significant contribution to his death. We have subsequently identified that toxicologist. His name is Dr. Brian Finkel of the University of Utah. Dr. Finkel told us that based on the limited information Francisco provided him at the time, he was unable to form any opinion on the cause of death. He told us also that he so informed Dr. Francisco. The other outside expert mentioned in the press release was subsequently identified by us as Dr. Robert Blanke of the Medical College of Virginia. He was said to have told Francisco that the drugs found in the body individually did not represent an overdose. That was true, as far as it went. But what Dr. Francisco neglected to include in his press release was that Dr. Blanke went on to say that the drugs taken together were in fact consistent with a drug death.
Dr. Blanke gave me a letter which he wrote to Dr. Francisco shortly after that press release was made public. And in that letter, Dr. Blanke says, in part, however, without hesitation, I believe that all of these drugs combined at the levels described would be consistent with a drug death, even with tolerance to some, and so stated to you. Now, back to back, those two statements are not consistent, and the press release is at least less than candid.
Because so many people have been at least less than candid, there has never been a definitive official investigation of the Elvis Presley death and of the people and the practices which may have been in part responsible.
The hearing to determine whether Dr. Nick will lose his license to practice medicine is scheduled to begin in Memphis on January 14. The criminal investigation of Dr. Nick remains ongoing.